Hey gang, it's Squill, and can you believe we're already halfway through the Fionna and Cake reviews? Where does the time go? The Winter Cane is the 6th episode of the miniseries and our second multiverse hopping episode. It's probably the most ambitious episode of the season and appears to be a fan favorite. Of the first 8 episodes, the Winter Cane is the only one to not have a unique cold opening. The cold open here basically just acts as the first couple minutes of the episode, as opposed to the episodes before this that each had their own unique opening that felt separate from the rest of the episode. I'm not really sure why they chose to do it this way. Personally, I would have done something with Candy Queen, maybe to help foreshadow the twist later on in the episode. That aside, the episode checks back in on Gary and Marshall, who we haven't seen in a couple episodes, as this is the first of 2 episodes to feature a subplot starring the two. It's a little weird how this is the first time Gary and Marshall met each other, despite them both being friends with Fionna and living fairly close to each other. But that's pretty nitpicky, and I get why it was done this way. I definitely appreciate the decision to give us multiple subplots in the Fionna world, as it helps make us care about it when it's in danger in the final episodes. Back in the main plot, Fionna, Cake, and Simon are still being chased by Scarab when he is frozen, making this the first of 3 episodes where Scarab is basically sidelined. I wouldn't mind it so much if it was just this one episode, but the fact that he's basically a non-threat for 3 episodes in a row makes it a little hard to take him seriously as an antagonist in the final 2 episodes. Our trio is saved by the Winter Cane, who's a pretty interesting character. He's basically a version of Simon who was able to overcome the madness of the crown while still keeping his ice powers. He's played by Brian David Gilbert, who I actually hadn't heard of before the episode released, but he gives a great performance. I absolutely love the visuals on the Winter Kingdom. This is easily the most visually appealing episode of the miniseries, and nowhere is that more apparent than in the absolutely stunning musical sequence, Winter Wonderworld. I seriously can't get over how beautiful this thing is, possibly the best looking sequence within the entirety of Adventure Time. Some beautifully composed shots here, and some of the most fluid animation Adventure Time has ever had. The sequence was animated by Smallboo, the team behind the guest animated sequences in Beyond the Grotto and Ketchup in the original series. Needless to say, their work on Adventure Time has been consistently phenomenal, and I hope they come back for the next project. The Winter King promises to duplicate his crown, thus giving Simon the same abilities he has. The Winter King also lends Fionna his sword, allowing her to fight better. Along with that, he charges Fionna's phone and gives it a signal, allowing her to text Gary. Gary being worried sick about Fionna and texting her non-stop was a really funny gag. Once Fionna calms Gary's nerves, he and Marshall begin running some errands. Meanwhile, the Winter Cane informs our trio that it'll take a week for him to create a duplicate crown. Cake suggests that they explore the Candy Kingdom in the meantime, to which the Winter King claims that it is forbidden, giving us our first piece of foreshadowing that he's not quite the great guy he appears to be. Cake eventually passes by an ice Marcy, giving us some interesting implications. Knowing the twist later on in the episode, it's entirely possible that Marceline attempted to stop the Winter King. This could have led to Marcy losing the fight and abandoning Winter King, or more interestingly, the Winter King killing Marceline intentionally or not. Either one of these scenarios would lead to him creating an ice Marceline out of guilt. The latter theory is definitely supported by a line the Winter King has later on in the episode. Despite my mixed thoughts on Scarab as a villain, I absolutely love this scene between him and Cake. The smug look on Cake's face as Scarab goes off about how her and Fionna are abominations is one of my favorite gags in the episode. Back in the B-plot, Gary and Marshall visit a candy shop to look for ingredients. It's weird that Lord Monochromacorn was turned into a human, but Cake wasn't. Gary and Marshall are very cute in this scene, love their dynamic. Meanwhile, in the main plot, Simon asks the Winter King about Betty, to which he responds with, "Oh right, the dead one." He then suggests Simon use the crown to make an Ice Betty, which is eerily similar to what he did with Marcy. It's interesting, I wonder if the Winter King still has some amount of guilt towards what happened with Betty, or if he genuinely just forgot about her. On the one hand, this Simon would have been living for 1,000 years and spent 100 of those years as the Winter King. It makes sense that to him, his time with Betty was sort of just a blip, a drop in the bucket. But it's also important to remember that this world's Betty wouldn't have gone to the future. Maybe this world's Betty stayed with Simon and he ended up hurting her. Maybe the Winter King did make an Ice Betty similar to how he did with Marceline. It's some interesting stuff to chew on. We're not left to chew on it for that long, however, as we are introduced to the Candy Queen, my favorite aspect of the episode. Hynden Walch is absolutely killing it in this performance. I honestly think she's kind of an underrated voice actor. She had some of the best line delivery as PB in the original show. She's also fantastic as Veridi in Kid Icarus Uprising. But the Candy Queen is probably my favorite role of hers. She's just having so much fun here. This PB Ice King role swap is such an inspired concept. It's great seeing the show play with its own tropes like this. This weird combination of PB and Ice King makes for one of my favorite characters in the miniseries, and I only wish he got more screen time. The Candy Queen kidnaps both of the Simons, and Fionna and Cake go off to rescue them. Back in Fionna World, we get easily the cutest scene in the episode as Gary and Marshall go on a date. Outside of the soft background track, the scene is completely silent, allowing us to simply watch these two enjoy each other's company. It's definitely aided by the wonderful snowy visuals, which helps it thematically connect back to the main plot. And as someone who's gay, it's genuinely really nice to see myself represented in something I care about as much as Adventure Time, as I'm sure a lot of queer women also felt with PB and Marcy. Between this and a certain scene a couple episodes from now, Fionna and Cake really nailed these cute, small romantic scenes. After this, Gary sneaks into the bakery as Marshall makes a mysterious phone call. Meanwhile, in the main plot, Candy Queen has kidnapped both of the Simons, and we get our second musical number in the episode. While not as visually appealing as the Winter King song, I mean, what truly is, from a musical standpoint, I actually prefer Baked with Love. It's just so dang catchy, it was pretty much stuck in my head until the week after when it was replaced by a certain other song. It's another great showcase of Hynden's excellent performance as the Candy Queen. I love the fact that Simon is genuinely enjoying the song despite being in danger. Even through the madness, he still sees PB as an intelligent person. Kinda makes me hope we get more Simon and PB interactions one day. The two would definitely get along well. After the song, Candy Queen reveals her plan to literally blend them all together. A pretty disgusting fate when you think about it. Back in Fionna World, Gary is showing Marshall his candy people, which is such a cute parallel to PB and her candy kingdom. This is when the lemon carbs come in as potential investors, which answers the mystery of the phone call Marshall made from before. Recontextualizing the lemongrabs as real-world Karens is such a funny concept. As this is going on, Fionna and Cake are beating up the candy people. There's some pretty solid action here. This makes for one of my favorite sequences in the episode, where Gary describes the candy people as Fionna beats them up. It's such a creative way to combine the two storylines and makes for such a memorable sequence. Fionna eventually makes her way up to the top, saving the two Simons. Fionna making out with the Winter King was, definitely a bit uncomfortable. I wonder how Simon felt watching this. However, Fionna ends up reverting the magic from the crown, causing the Winter King to die a pretty gruesome death. Simon's reaction here really just says it all. Fionna and Cake reverting the magic from certain items has happened a couple times now, but the show never properly addresses it. Doesn't really bother me all that much, it's at least an important plot point in this episode, but it is a weird decision and I wonder why it was made. This shot of a melted ice Marcy is so damn depressing, like, goddamn. Candy Queen is reverted back to PB as she reveals that the Winter King had been projecting his madness onto her the entire time. The interaction here between Simon and PB is hilarious and definitely my favorite joke in the episode. PB kissing Fionna is also great as it doubles as not only confirmation that Fionna is bisexual, but also as a deep-cut reference to the original Adventure Time pilot. Despite this, Fionna still feels guilty about killing all those candy people, which leads into our arc in the next couple episodes. She, Cake, and Simon leave the Winter King world as Scarab is freed and tries to capture them. Before the episode ends, we get one more Gary and Marshall scene, where, despite having been rejected by the lemon carbs, the two still share a very wholesome moment together. Gary explaining the plot to Slumber Party Panic is a very cute reference. Speaking of cute, Fionna, Cake, and Simon end up in the baby world. It's a sweet little character moment between Simon and Fionna, and a great bookend to the episode. Love this shot of baby Finn. And that was The Winter Cane, an overall highly entertaining episode with a ton of great stuff in it. It's quite possibly the most visually appealing episode of Adventure Time, even outside of the guest animation. The Winter Cane himself is a very intriguing character and a fun take on the Ice King. And the Candy Queen is just an absolute delight. The character really just speaks for herself. The Gary and Marshall subplot is wholesome as hell and doesn't take up too much of the episode. While it's not my personal favorite episode, I can definitely see why it is for a ton of other people. There's a lot of great stuff in here. And with that, please let me know how you felt about the Winter Cane in the comments, and have a good one. Squill out.